Kael was more than a gorilla. For 30 years, he was the soul of the sanctuary, a gentle king whose presence kept his troop at peace. But when a hidden infection threatened his life, the vet and the keeper made an unthinkable choice, stepping into his den, armed with nothing but trust and a scalpel. Against all odds, the giant allowed them to perform the impossible, and within hours Kael was walking with his family again. Stay with us, because this gorilla's moment of relief will reveal a lesson about pain, fragility, and love that no one was ready to face. Dr. Ben Carter, the sanctuary's head veterinarian, was, by contrast, a man of science and youthful energy. At 32, he was a brilliant diagnostician with a fierce dedication that bordered on obsession. He saw Kael as the pinnacle of his life's work, a creature of profound importance to be protected at all costs. He felt a connection to the old silverback that was different from Marcus's. It was one of awe and a deep, clinical responsibility. The trouble began subtly. A missed breakfast, a disinterest in the morning enrichment games. Then, a visible lethargy that was profoundly out of character for the ever-vigilant leader. Marcus was the first to voice the concern. "He's not right, Ben," Marcus said, his weathered face etched with worry as they stood at the observation point. "Look at him. The light's gone out of his eyes." Ben had already seen it. For 2 days, he'd been monitoring Kael, and his concern was escalating into alarm. That afternoon, he saw the cause. As Kael turned his head, the sunlight caught a slight, unnatural bulge on his jawline, just below the ear. It was subtle, but it was there. By the next morning, it had doubled in size, a hard, angry swelling that was clearly causing the gorilla immense pain. "It's an abscess," Ben said, his voice tight with clinical certainty as he focused his binoculars. "A big one. Probably a molar root infection that's gone deep into the tissue. And it's in the worst possible place." Ben's mind raced through the terrifying list of anatomical dangers. The abscess was located perilously close to the carotid artery, the jugular vein, and a nexus of critical facial nerves. If it ruptured inwards, the massive release of bacteria would flood Kael's system, causing catastrophic septicemia. Death would be slow, agonizing, and certain. The obvious answer was surgery. But Kael was 38 years old, an elder in gorilla terms. His heart was strong, but the strain of a full general anesthetic could be too much. The risk of cardiac arrest on the operating table was terrifyingly high. Ben was trapped in a vet's worst nightmare, a choice between two potentially fatal options. "We can't put him under, Ben. He won't wake up," Marcus stated, his voice raspy with emotion. "I've seen it before with the old ones. And we can't just leave it, Marcus," Ben countered, frustration sharpening his tone. "That thing is a time bomb. We're watching him die either way." For 2 days, they tried aggressive antibiotic treatments, hiding the potent drugs in Kael's favorite mangoes. But the swelling only grew, becoming taut and shiny. Kael stopped eating entirely. He isolated himself in the troop's sleeping den, his great head resting on his knuckles, his breathing shallow. The troop was in disarray, sensing their leader's decline. His mate, Anya, paced restlessly at the den entrance, while his youngest son, a playful juvenile named Zuri, seemed lost and confused, his usual antics replaced by a somber watchfulness. Watching the family's distress, a desperate, high-risk plan began to form in Ben's mind. It was unorthodox, dangerous, and hinged entirely on a single, intangible variable: trust. "We're not going to put him under," Ben announced to his anxious team. "Not completely. We'll use a heavy sedative, just enough to make him groggy and dull the pain. Then, Marcus and I are going in." A stunned silence fell over the room. Entering the enclosure with a conscious, 500-pound silverback, even a sedated one in agonizing pain, was a violation of every safety protocol. "The goal is a surgical strike," Ben explained, his voice gaining conviction. "I get in, I find a soft spot, I lance it, and I get out. We relieve the pressure, drain the infection, and give him a massive, long-acting antibiotic injection directly into the muscle. We'll be relying on your relationship with him, Marcus. He has to let us do this." Marcus looked from Ben's determined face to the monitor showing Kael's pain stillness. He took a deep breath. "He trusts me. He might allow it." The preparations were agonizingly tense. A dart gun delivered the sedative cocktail with a soft hiss. The team watched, holding their breath, as the powerful drugs began to take hold. Kael didn't fall asleep. Instead, a deep lethargy settled over him. He remained upright, his great shoulders slumped, his eyes heavy-lidded but still aware. With the rest of the troop safely secured in the outdoor habitat, Ben and Marcus unlatched the heavy steel door to the night house. The air inside was thick with the scent of gorilla and sickness. Kael watched them enter, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. It wasn't aggression, but a sound of deep misery. This was the moment of truth. Marcus approached first, his movements slow and non-threatening. He didn't look Kael in the eye, a sign of respect. He sat on the floor a few feet away and began to speak, his voice a low, soothing murmur. He used the same comforting sounds and phrases he had used for 30 years, a private language of reassurance that was older than Ben's entire veterinary career. "Easy now, old man," Marcus crooned. "We're here to help. Just want to make the hurt go away." Kael's rumbling softened. He rested his head back against the wall, his gaze never leaving the two men. Ben took it as his cue. With his heart hammering against his ribs, he approached, his sterile medical kit in hand. He could feel the heat radiating from the gorilla's body. He could smell the infection. He was now inches away from an animal that could end his life with a flick of the wrist. "Okay, Kael," Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let's get this over with." He gently palpated the swollen area. Kael flinched, a wave of pain passing through him, but he didn't move. He held perfectly still, a monumental act of trust. Ben found what he was looking for, a small, soft area where the abscess was closest to the surface. He took a deep breath, held his scalpel with unwavering precision, and made a swift, deep incision. The relief was instantaneous and dramatic. A torrent of foul-smelling infection erupted from the wound, releasing the immense pressure that had been building for days. Kael let out a huge, shuddering sigh. The tension visibly drained from his massive frame, his shoulders slumping not with sickness, but with the pure relief from pain. He blinked slowly, looking at Ben with a groggy, almost grateful expression. Working quickly, Ben flushed the cavity, cleaned the wound, and administered the powerful antibiotic injection. Within minutes, they were backing out of the den, locking the door behind them. They had done it. They had stared into the abyss and won. The next 48 hours were euphoric. The change in Kael was nothing short of miraculous. The morning after the procedure, he emerged from the den and drank deeply from the enclosure stream for the first time in nearly a week. By afternoon, he was eating soft fruits, his appetite returning. He rejoined his family, who greeted him with gentle grunts and grooming. Anya meticulously cleaned the area around his wound, while Zuri, seeing his father's strength return, cautiously engaged him in a game of chest patting. Ben and Marcus watched from the observation deck, a feeling of triumphant relief washing over them. They had pulled off the impossible. They had saved the king. "You did it, son," Marcus said, clapping Ben on the shoulder with a force that nearly buckled his knees. "You gave him back to his family." Ben felt a surge of pride, unlike any he had ever known. Seeing Kael, peaceful and pain-free, surrounded by his troop, was the ultimate validation of his life's purpose. The worst was over. The tragedy began with the sunrise on the third day. It started when Kael refused his morning mango, turning his head away from the offering. An hour later, Marcus noticed him shivering, a fine tremor running through his massive body despite the warmth of the day. Ben was called immediately. He ran to the enclosure, his heart seizing with a cold, familiar dread. Through his binoculars, he saw Kael's rapid, shallow breathing. He was leaning against a rock, his strength clearly failing him. Ben didn't need a blood test to know what was happening. He saw in the pale, bluish tinge of Kael's gums. Septic shock. The abscess, caused by a hideously aggressive, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, had been a ticking time bomb. But the fuse had been lit long before Ben ever picked up his scalpel. The infection had already breached the vascular system, silently seeding itself into Kael's bloodstream. Lancing the abscess had relieved the pain and swelling, creating a beautiful, deceptive illusion of recovery. But it had been a fool's hope. The poison was already running rampant through his body, shutting down his organs one by one. The antibiotics were fighting a war that had already been lost. A gut-wrenching helplessness washed over Ben. There was nothing to be done. To try and tranquilize Kael now for treatment would be a death sentence. To intervene would be to steal his final moments with his family. The man who had, 2 days prior, bravely entered a den to save a life could now only stand by and watch that life ebb away. The troop, sensing the finality, gathered around their fallen leader. Anya lay beside him, her hand on his back, her frantic grooming replaced by a still, sorrowful vigil. Zuri pushed his face into his father's side, whimpering, not understanding why his playmate wouldn't move. From across the moat, Ben watched, his victory having turned to ash in his mouth. He made the call to prepare the euthanasia drugs, his voice a choked whisper, knowing it was a futile gesture. As the sun climbed higher, Kael stirred one last time. He lifted his great head, and his gaze swept across the enclosure, past his grieving family, and locked onto Ben's. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation. There was only a dim, fading light, a flicker of the great soul that was now preparing to depart. He held Ben's gaze for a long second. Then, with a final, shuddering exhalation, Kael laid his head on the warm earth and was still. The sanctuary fell into a profound silence, broken only by the mournful cries of a family that had just lost its center. Ben stood frozen, the unused syringe heavy in his hand, a monument to his own failure. He had done everything right. His skill, his courage, his deep bond with the animal. It had all culminated in a perfect procedure that had bought Kael 2 final, peaceful days with his family. But that relief, which had felt like a miraculous sunrise, was only a fleeting, beautiful twilight before an inevitable, tragic night. He had not prevented the tragedy. He had merely written its final, heartbreaking chapter.